Thanks very much for inviting me to make this presentation. It's a bit of a esoteric one. I don't want to make it too boring right after lunch, but what we're faced with often enough in our businesses is the maintenance, let's say, of lots of processes. So maybe we have 300 processes that we want to maintain that are usually processes that the client puts together. So a process like the example we have here is dangerous cargo. So in the shipping industry, there's lots of forms to fill because there's lots of high stakes processes, lots of stakeholders, division. One stakeholder wants this, the other wants that, and in the end we have a process that satisfies everybody. We've been doing for about 27 years, doing workflows, what we call workflow. We send a form around to people. One person fills it, the other person sees it, the other person approves it. And many things to do with user interface are involved in this. First of all, a workflow is a user interface tool. It is a tool that's separated from the coding, the general coding, because it deals with the interactions in a person and something he just sees it, passes it, sees it, passes it back, and so on. So workflow, which you've probably come across more or less, is basically an interaction between what you see and what you do about what you see. Send it. Why it's separate from the coding? Because it's very difficult to go and look at every single place where a decision or action is made in the software and to enter in that action all the possible potential next steps. So it's a next step business, and it's abstracted because it's convenient to abstract it. I mentioned here generalized processes and renderings because in UI, basically, you have to show somebody something that's familiar. If you show something that's not familiar, the person's fumbling around trying to figure out what button to press or what to do about what they just seen. So the idea that you abstraction is actually the theme of this presentation. So how do we abstract these workflow stages so that people know and look at something that's familiar? Here's a form. This is a dangerous cargo form. So it's excruciatingly boring to read. It's confusing. It has on it many things that are, for some people, something that they need to know now. Other things are for somebody to know much later, like who signed this and what date of birth it was, in case somebody impersonates the bloke that was signing it. So there's a lot of things here, a lot of things, and they are not all one process. It's just somebody dumped them on a form because that's the easiest way to get you to fill part of this, and then something can happen. And usually it works. Somebody in the end gets this form and sticks it in a drawer, and if there's a fire on a ship, they'll know what kind of chemicals they need to put it out. So it has its purpose, but it's certainly not a UI masterpiece. And it's certainly not also manageable in the long term, and I'll explain why. This is a workflow, and what it says is that the form goes from this stage to this stage, and then it goes, if this happens, then it comes back again to the first stage, and so on. There's problems with this. First of all, this is a text. Somebody can read it. The computer can't compare this workflow with another. So it can't tell you, for this form, use this workflow. It can't tell you that because it can't read this. This is us writing it. Also, it's a very simple, again, if you read, it says HSQE superintendent, but that's, it's not persisted anywhere. So what do we actually persist here in order to abstract this workflow and reuse it and make sure it's user-friendly and the UIs we use are good UIs? The answer is there's nothing here that abstracts. Here are the workflow stages in sort of listed, which are very difficult to read. But it says basically send back, request information, send information. This doesn't tell you what the process is. This could be from dangerous cargo to discharge of a ship to reporting on an audit finding. It could be anything. So the workflow steps in themselves don't abstract. So there's no pattern to them. So there's no way to make a decent UI with them. I don't know. I went back here. So we propose a different way, and we have a method to do it. So we're lucky in that we have alternatives to the bureaucratic workflow. This is a model of an enterprise, or it's sort of 50 nodes in the model of an enterprise that could be 5,000 nodes. Here we have the actual data of the enterprise and the logic of the enterprise all in one place. So we have data unification, but it's a monster of a model here. And we start with this. Then we get this workflow artifact. Let's say it was the dangerous cargo form that you saw earlier, that black and white unsightly form. We take the attributes out of that and we put them down there. So we have the attributes, which includes who signed it and how old the person that signed it is, but also important things like how much cargo, dangerous cargo there was, what kind of dangerous cargo it is, and so on. You have to understand that in the model, once we put these things in the model and not just a list like here, there are all different processes. It's a different process to say that you have to do this, perform this, you have to fill this form, otherwise you can't discharge. That's a process. The other process is that if you sign this form and say that's the cargo and it isn't the cargo, then we need to know where to find you. That's another process. So the form has many processes. We just took them out of the form, took the fields out and listed them over there. Next stage is we make a model out of them. They actually do propagate in the way that we mentioned earlier, which is that each one affects a different thing. Then, once you have a model of that part of the business, and it looks roughly like this, then that model has to sit in a UI that is familiar. What's the UI that's familiar? To us, it's what you're doing. What's your task? If your task is to approve this workflow, then you should see what processes emanate from your approval. This is a depiction of what emanates from your approval, so that you achieve some sort of conformance. And if you don't do it, you'll end up having a fine or the cargo being refused or your ship being taken out of the port. So what we're saying here is that workflow stages aren't just back, forth, send back, store. They are actually business processes. And it's these business processes that we have to persist in order to compare workflows and start to get some sort of pattern and reusability. And what this shows you is if these people are going to report on a stage of the workflow, you better give them something usable, because they're not going to be able to look at that form and fill in a field in that form. You're going to give them something else. Sorry. Just to move away from the boredom of a conformance, a dangerous cargo conformance form, here's a discharge plan for a tanker. And there's a button on there that says the discharge plan is fine and it goes. Now, this is what happens. You start pushing that cargo into the manifolds on the right and onto the next stage of the transport process. So when you press the button on the form that it's okay, and then you press the button for the cargo pumps to start, this cargo is going to Vienna from Trieste. So you can imagine that that process is not just a simple approved plan. It's approved plan to send cargo to Vienna, and there's 100 stages in between. Some of those might bite you where it hurts if you haven't thought about it and if you're not well prepared. That's a workflow step, though. It's just the same as the one that says complete form. So that's it. The noise you heard at the beginning is the cargo pump starting at 9,000 tons an hour. So you've got to be a bit careful what you've checked before that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lyras. Very impressive. Very impressive example. Do you have any questions?
I have one comment, just a minute, before the lady in the back there made a presentation about databases and graph databases. This can't be done on a conventional database. You can't do this on a normal database. You can't build this on a regular database, on a relational database, because I was asking you, some companies will have to use non-SQL databases for a reason. Here's the reason. Here's one reason.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. We just moved from human orientism to task orientism, and I would like to bridge it with what the speaker said. The task is very important. The industry, how we define the industry, is so important. So what's your thoughts on that? So I think we bridge everything now.
Well, you have to incorporate everything. It's the person that you're engaging in pressing the button of approval. You don't want that person to press the button of approval before everything's ready. So there is a human aspect there. It is human-centered, because what's that person doing? Where are you finding him when you're asking him to press the button? If he's in the hole there, then what are you asking him to do? So the human-centered part is hugely prevalent, but the people their minds are actually involved in the task. So how they react has to do with what they think the task is. If to them it's a bureaucratic task, it's a problem. A friend of mine the other day had his internet cut because somebody in the office below pressed the wrong button for ceasing the service and stopped the service for the whole building. This is just the workflow stage. The fact that this person is actually changing how everybody's going to work in a building ought to be more prevalent. That person and the designer should have known. But are we giving the designer the tools, or does the designer have to sit there for a year, as my colleague said here, designing a UI to fit the problem?
Exactly, because there are different tasks that are functional and other tasks are far deeper and more complicated. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.